I want you to win your fantasy league. So it's time to take your team to the next level. These are the potential league winners that you must trade for right now. Beginning with Amon-Ra St. Brown, the Lions wide receiver, who is a must-buy. You see, he has not topped 14 fantasy points now in 5+ weeks. However, this was his second game back from injury, so let's take a look at how it went. St. Brown led his team in snaps, which is what you would expect, but the big thing, he played a season-high 97% of the snaps. So the underlying usage is great, but it only led to 9.5 fantasy points. On 9 targets, though, very quietly, the usage is all still there. He just didn't have the one big catch or the touchdown. And now over his last 11 healthy games, St. Brown is averaging 10.8 targets per game, the most of any receiver in the NFL. Yes, he is somebody you want to try and acquire. And you also want to go get Darnell Mooney, who just this past week had arguably his best game of the season, putting up 17.5 fantasy points on 8 targets. And Mooney now averages nearly 8 targets per game over the past month, right around the time the Bears changed their offense to play to Justin Fields' strengths. So that's why this is likely to continue, but that's not all. Because Mooney is beating man coverage at a top 12 rate right now. He knows how to get open, his speed downfield, it will lead to big plays, especially since there's easier passes in this Bears offense. And those easier passes are because of Justin Fields running. It's opening up one-on-one coverage on the outside for Mooney more often. Go get him. This is a great recipe for success. Now, you should also get James Conner, who returned from injury on Sunday, and he immediately took back his running back 1 role. And he made a statement here, playing a season-high 72% of the snaps, more than he did week 1 when he was as healthy as ever, and that's because Eno Benjamin has not been all that efficient when given the full workload the past couple of weeks. And I have even more good news for you. Conner went right back to seeing most of the passing game usage. Benjamin still saw some, but it ended up leading to Conner seeing 5 targets in this game. And right now, James Conner, if you look at his rest of season schedule, has the 10th easiest schedule to close out the season. But if you look at the fantasy playoffs specifically, he ends up having a top 5 fantasy schedule. So you want to go get him and then this next wide receiver. And that would be Chris Godwin, who is continuing to see elite usage. He is going to be this next player who pops all the way off. Like earlier in the year, Alvin Kamara, right? We just saw with Joe Mixon. Next up is going to be Chris Godwin. Because Godwin just saw 10 targets this past week. He led the team in snaps. He led the team in routes. And oh yeah, he led the team in targets. And now over his past 4 games, he's averaging 11.5 targets per game. And how good is this? Let's take a look. Godwin currently ranks 6th amongst all wide receivers over the last month of the season in fantasy usage. However, he ranks 30th in fantasy points. Something's gotta give. This is unlikely to continue. That gap is going to close, and Godwin will be a top 10 wide receiver soon to close the year. Now check this out. The reason he's not scoring more points is because he has 0 touchdowns on the year. But this is not going to continue because Godwin scores a touchdown every 13 targets in his career. And heading into last week, he had 55 targets. After last week, he now has 65 targets, yet 0 touchdowns. He's expected to actually have around 5 touchdowns on the year so far. So expect Godwin to score, and potentially in bundles in the upcoming weeks. So get him, but then sell this next wide receiver. And that would be Mecole Hardman. You should trade him away. Now, he's been very good as of late. I mean, this past week, he just put up another 20-point performance, and he's averaging 18.2 points over his last 4 games. However, his snaps just decreased this past week. There's a reason why the Kansas City Chiefs traded for Kadarius Toney. If you saw it in this past game and plenty of games this year, Mecole Hardman is still a very raw player. He's running the wrong routes. He's not doing the right thing. Patrick Mahomes is getting mad at him. Yes, he's skilled, but he's not as skilled as, say, a Kadarius Toney. And in week 9, he ended up losing snaps to Kadarius Toney, who only played 9 snaps. He played in the beginning of the game on scripted plays, which means he knew the plays going into this. It wasn't like the full playbook plays. They did them in practice. But those 9 snaps came directly from Mecole Hardman. And also, Justin Watson saw a season-high 26% of the snaps, which took away from Mecole Hardman. So you should expect Toney to play more moving forward, which is going to take snaps away from Hardman. So sell him and then buy this next running back. Go buy Josh Jacobs, who is now coming off of back-to-back poor fantasy point days. This past week, it wasn't awful, but just 11.7 fantasy points. This offense in general is struggling. You're getting less touchdowns lately out of Josh Jacobs. However, even in a poor game, a bad game, he still puts up 20 touches in week 9. And look, Amir Abdullah is still seeing usage behind him. If we pull this up right here, you can see Amir Abdullah played 14 snaps. It's not even close. It's Josh Jacobs as the RB1, but the concerning part would be that Amir Abdullah is seeing some passing game usage. 11 routes run this past week, but Josh Jacobs is still running about double. Josh Jacobs is still seeing easily top 10 running back usage this year. Get him before your fantasy playoff starts because the touchdowns, yeah, they're going to come back soon. And go get T. Higgins because it's the perfect time to strike. He's going on the bye week, which means, yeah, he's going to score 0 points. He has to be put on the bench, which maybe your league mates are going to be more willing to send him out in a deal because they need some players this week. Now, Higgins just scored 13 points on 8 targets. Another solid game from him. He hasn't had a massive game in a couple of weeks now, so people are forgetting about this, but here's why you want him. With Jamar Chase out, he's the clear and obvious #1 option, especially downfield for Joe Burrow, a guy who's throwing nearly 40 times per game this season. Yeah, that's pretty dang good. And Higgins over 7 healthy games this year because he's left too early has been elite. He's averaging nearly 16 fantasy points per game, which basically translates to being a top 10 receiver this this year. So trade for Higgins and Kadarius Toney, a player we talked about earlier when we discussed McCole Harmon. And look, he played 9 snaps like we said, and that's not a lot, but these are definitely going to come up because he's still learning the playbook for one, and the investment made by the Chiefs means that they are incentivized to use him. They didn't give away just 1 pick, they gave away 2 picks for Kadarius Toney. Let's not forget what Toney did as a rookie. Yes, it was a small sample. Yes, he was banged up often, but when he was actually on the field, he was one of the most electric and dominating wide receivers in football. Yeah, he was top 5 at beating man coverage last year, and the names that were basically in the same area as him, above him, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, DK Metcalf. And he was the number 7 wide receiver in the league at earning targets. This factors in zone coverage as well. That is elite. So buy low on him and this next veteran. And hey, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to subscribe for more. And that would be Amari Cooper, who's quietly a top 12 wide receiver this year despite playing with Jacoby Brissett. I mean, this is kind of shocking because look at how bad Brissett has been. Brissett ranks 37th in accuracy this year. Yeah, that's the right number here. A lot of backup quarterbacks, that means, since there's only 32 NFL teams, have been more accurate than him. And because of this, Amari Cooper, 20% of his targets this season have been uncatchable. They're basically pointless, yet he's still producing top 12 numbers. That's how good Amari Cooper is at getting open downfield and yards after the catch. Buy him before Deshaun Watson returns. And also buy this tight end in TJ Hawkinson, who just changed teams in his same division. The division rival goes from the Lions to the Vikings. And it was a question on how much he's going to play. Well, he played 90% of the snaps this past week. And this led to a season high 9 catches. One of the few tight ends this season to actually have 9 catches in a game, but it gets even better. Because Hawkinson, when he was with the Lions, only played 14% of the time out of the slot. In his first game with the Vikings, he played 44% of the time, 30% more out of the slot. And this matters because slot usage leads to much higher upside targets. You have a lot more of the field to work with. You're usually getting a linebacker on you in space. That's a massive advantage for tight ends. So go get him and then this next rookie wide receiver. And that would be George Pickens, who's coming off the bye, so there's less hype around him, and people maybe forgot that Chase Claypool's no longer on this team or haven't put 1 and 2 together, which means, yeah, more usage for George Pickens. Buy him now. Because right before the bye week with Chase Claypool still in Pittsburgh, he saw a season high 90% of the snaps. And he didn't have a great game out there because he faced one of the best secondaries in the NFL with the Philadelphia Eagles, and he had a shadow matchup basically with Darius Slay. But he's not going to have Darius Slay on him ever again this season, or a cornerback really like him this year, which means a lot of upside, especially with increased usage with no Claypool. And right now on the season, the rookie is top 20 in cheat code targets. That's what we call them here. It's deep targets, he has 14, and red zone targets, he has 4 of those. Now what these cheat code targets do is they give you a very safe floor, right? You have a lot of ways out in your game, and also a massive ceiling if everything clicks. So I'm buying George Pickens in the trade market and then also the sports stock market. And that would be on Mojo. Yes, indeed, the sports stock market, where we can now buy stock in actual players' careers. You see, George Pickens' stock over the last month, it's only up 7%, which is shocking to me considering Chase Claypool is now gone. That's a pretty massive deal, but there hasn't been massive movement in his market. And if you look right here on Mojo, his current stock price is about $10 per share when the average wide receiver in the NFL is going for about $10 per share. I personally, if we're talking about the entire career of George Pickens, think that he is an above average wide receiver as a 2nd round pick from a big school in college in Georgia, and now he's producing in the NFL already with bad quarterbacks. So I've already personally bought his stock, and if you would like to as well and buy other players' stocks, you can check it out with the link below in the description to Mojo, the sports stock market. Now, wide receiver you're not going to want to buy. If anything, you want to sell them, and that's going to be Brandon Ayuk, who's coming off the bye week, and very recently we saw him put up 20 points right before the bye on 6 targets. Now, this is great production, but Deebo Samuel missed this game. And Christian McCaffrey, in his first game completely unleashed by Kyle Shanahan, saw 9 targets, a team-high 9 targets in that game. Don't expect Brandon Ayuk to get 20 points on 6 targets moving forward, especially when George Kittle gets more involved and Deebo Samuel returns. Ayuk might be the 4th option in this passing attack. That's not somebody you want. Sell high on him, but buy this next wide receiver. And that would be DeAndre Hopkins. If you could somehow possibly go get this guy, do everything you can to, because this past week we see him put up 13.6 fantasy points. That's fine, but it's not the massive weeks he was putting up, so maybe this is a window to go and get him. And this dude has been absolutely elite now through 2 to 3 games since returning from suspension. You see, heading into last week, over his first 2 games back from suspension, he had a whopping 27 targets. He was number 1 in wide receiver usage and number 2 in wide receiver efficiency, which is the big one because his efficiency was dropping off last year. So maybe the guy who owns Hopkins in your league doesn't want to trade him at all, and that's fine, but maybe this is your chance to go get him. And this is also one of your last chances to get the fantasy cheat sheet, my 5-step system to help you win more, become a fantasy champion, and beat your league mates. It has everything you need to win your league, including rest of the season rankings, which will definitely help for trades before your league trade deadline. And if you don't win your league, as you see right here, I will refund the one-time payment of $10. This is risk-free. So trades in the fantasy cheat sheet will help you improve your team, but also the waiver wire will as well. And you can check out if any of these players are still available on your waiver wire. If so, go and get them.